smug, victorious smirk crept across Officer Higgins's face the moment the judge struck the block. Behind the shield of her badge, she was certain she had crafted the perfect lie against the perfect victim. Unfortunately for her, the man sitting silently across the aisle was far from the easy target she imagined, and her personal nightmare was only just beginning. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B remained shut, sealing the suffocating tension inside. The air was thick, heavy with the hum of the aging HVAC system and the unspoken weight of a trial that had caught the local media's attention. Sitting at the defense table was Devin Carmichael. He was a tall, sharply dressed black man in a tailored charcoal suit, his posture impeccably straight, his hands resting calmly on the polished mahogany. He didn't fidget, he didn't glare. His terrifying calmness was entirely at odds with the severity of the charges he faced: aggravated assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, and obstruction of justice. On the witness stand sat Officer Brenda Higgins of the 14th Precinct. Higgins was a 12-year veteran of the force, with a reputation for aggressive tactics and a pristine disciplinary record. Pristine, at least, on paper. Today, she was playing the role of the dutiful, traumatized public servant. She wore her Class A uniform, every brass button polished to a mirror shine, her hair pulled back into a severe, no-nonsense bun. Assistant District Attorney Timothy O'Shea, a man who built his career on protecting the precinct's reputation, paced in front of the jury box. "Officer Higgins," O'Shea began, his voice sympathetic, designed to coax a harrowing tale from his star witness. "Let's take you back to the night of October 14th. It was raining heavily, wasn't it?" "Yes, sir." "Torrential downpour," Higgins replied, leaning into the microphone. Her voice was steady, practiced. Visibility was incredibly poor. "Officer Tolliver and I were on routine patrol down Miller Avenue, an area known for high narcotics traffic. And that is when you spotted the defendant's vehicle?" "Correct," Higgins said, her eyes briefly darting toward Devin before returning to the jury. A late-model Mercedes sedan. The windows were tinted far beyond the legal limit. Given the weather and the neighborhood, it was a major safety hazard. "I initiated a standard traffic stop." Devin sat perfectly still, a silver Mont Blanc pen resting loosely between his fingers. He didn't shake his head in denial. He simply watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Walk us through what happened when you approached the vehicle," O'Shea prompted, pausing dramatically. Higgins took a breath, puffing out her chest slightly. "I approached the driver's side. The window was rolled down only a fraction of an inch. I asked the driver, Mr. Carmichael, to lower the window completely and produce his license and registration. He was immediately verbally non-compliant. He became agitated, demanding to know why he was stopped, raising his voice over the rain. "Did you feel threatened at this point, officer?" "I was on high alert, yes," Higgins said, nodding solemnly. "In my training and experience, rapid escalation and refusal to follow simple commands are pre-attack indicators." I asked him again to step out of the vehicle. That is when he made a sudden, erratic, and unprovoked lunge toward the center console. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Arthur Pendleton, a stern man with 30 years on the bench, banged his gavel once. "Order." He reached for the console. O'Shea repeated heavily. "What went through your mind, Officer Higgins?" "I feared for my life, and the life of my partner," Higgins said, her voice dropping a register to convey gravity. "I didn't know if he was reaching for a firearm. I drew my service weapon, broke the driver's side window with my baton, and extracted Mr. Carmichael from the vehicle. He violently resisted, striking me in the jaw with his elbow before Officer Tolliver and I could wrestle him to the pavement and apply restraints." O'Shea turned to the jury, letting the image of the violent struggle linger in their minds. A routine traffic stop, and you were merely trying to get home to your family, Officer Higgins. "Objection." A smooth baritone voice cut through the air. Silas Sterling, Devin's defense attorney, stood up. He was a veteran civil rights lawyer, known for his methodical and devastating cross-examinations. "Counsel is testifying." "Sustained," Judge Pendleton rumbled. "Mr. O'Shea, keep it to questions." No further questions, Your Honor, O'Shea said, taking his seat with a satisfied nod to Higgins. Higgins adjusted her posture on the stand, radiating a quiet, untouchable arrogance. She had told this story 100 times in 100 different ways. Juries always believed the uniform. She looked at Devin Carmichael and offered a fleeting, microscopic smirk, a look that said, "I own this room. You are nothing." Silas Sterling buttoned his jacket and walked slowly toward the podium. He didn't carry any notes. "Your witness, Mr. Sterling," the judge offered. Silas smiled, a chillingly polite expression. "Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Higgins, good morning." "Morning," she replied crisply, her guard immediately going up. "Officer Higgins, you painted quite a harrowing picture for us today," Silas began, his tone almost conversational, entirely devoid of the hostility Higgins was anticipating. A dark, rainy night. An uncooperative suspect. A sudden lunge for a weapon that, I note for the record, was never recovered from my client's vehicle. "As I stated," Higgins replied smoothly, "I didn't wait to find out what he was reaching for. My training dictates that action is faster than reaction." "Action is faster than reaction," Silas repeated, pacing slowly. A catchy phrase. "Now, let's talk about protocol. The 14th Precinct mandates that body-worn cameras be activated prior to interacting with the public during a traffic stop. Is that correct?" "Yes, that is standard operating procedure. Yet, your camera captured absolutely nothing of this terrifying encounter. Why is that, officer?" Higgins didn't flinch. She had her excuse perfectly polished. "As I noted in my incident report, my camera experienced a catastrophic battery failure due to the heavy rain. It malfunctioned." "I see." Silas nodded slowly. "Water damage. A tragic technological failure. And your partner, Officer Tolliver? I suppose the rain was equally biased against his equipment?" O'Shea stood up. "Objection, argumentative." "Sustained." "Mr. Sterling, tone it down," the judge warned. "Apologies, Your Honor," Silas said, not looking the least bit sorry. "Officer Higgins, did Officer Tolliver's camera record the incident?" "No," Higgins answered, her jaw tightening ever so slightly. "His camera mount was broken earlier in our shift, and the device was secured in the glove compartment of our cruiser." "Remarkable," Silas said softly. "2 officers, 2 cameras, 0 footage, leaving us entirely dependent on your word." "My word, and my sworn oath," Higgins shot back, projecting indignant authority. "Let's test that word," Silas said, leaning against the podium. "You testified that Mr. Carmichael was verbally non-compliant and shouting. You also testified that his window was only rolled down a fraction of an inch. If the window was barely open and the rain was torrential, how could you hear his alleged threats so clearly?" Higgins hesitated for a fraction of a second. He was yelling very loudly. I could hear him through the glass. You could hear him through the acoustic, double-paned, sound-dampening glass of a 2024 Mercedes S-Class. Silas raised an eyebrow. "Are you aware that specific vehicle model is engineered to block out exterior noise up to 80 decibels? "I heard what I heard," Higgins said defensively, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the armrests of the witness chair. "Let's move to the lunge," Silas continued, pivoting seamlessly. "You stated Mr. Carmichael lunged for the center console. Are you aware of what my client does for a living, Officer Higgins?" O'Shea jumped to his feet. "Objection. Relevance. The defendant's occupation has no bearing on his actions during a traffic stop." "Goes to state of mind, Your Honor," Silas countered smoothly. "And it directly contradicts the officer's assertion of a violent motive." Judge Pendleton frowned, looking over his reading glasses. "I'll allow it, but tread lightly, Mr. Sterling." Overruled. Silas turned back to Higgins. "Do you know what he does?" "I believe his booking sheet said something about consulting," Higgins replied dismissively. "Not quite," Silas corrected, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Devin Carmichael is a senior federal auditor for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Specifically, he leads the task force that investigates municipal police departments for systemic civil rights violations, excessive force, and the falsification of police reports." The courtroom collectively inhaled. A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over the room. In the gallery, a few reporters furiously began typing on their phones. Higgins' confident posture cracked. Her face drained of color, leaving a sickly, pale wash over her cheeks. She looked at Devin Carmichael. Devin still hadn't moved. He just watched her, his expression utterly serene, like a predator observing a trapped animal realizing it was in a cage. I wasn't aware of his specific title, Higgins stammered, recovering quickly. But no one is above the law, Mr. Sterling. Not even a federal auditor. He still resisted. No one is above the law, Silas agreed, his voice suddenly losing its polite veneer, hardening into steel. We agree on that, officer. You stated you broke his window because you feared for your life when he reached for the console. But you didn't know what he was doing. He was making a furtive movement. He was pressing a button, Officer Higgins, Silas said, walking back to the defense table. He picked up a small, black USB drive. You see, while your body cameras conveniently died, and your partner's camera was safely tucked away, you failed to account for the victim. Silas held up the drive for the judge and the jury to see. Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce Exhibit C into evidence. The 2024 Mercedes S-Class is equipped with an integrated Mayday SOS system. When Mr. Carmichael realized you were escalating a hostile pretextual stop, he did exactly what his DOJ security training taught him to do. He leaned over to the console and pressed the SOS emergency button, a button that immediately opens a live recorded audio channel to a centralized security dispatch, logging GPS, speed, and ambient audio. O'Shea's face went completely white. He looked at Higgins, who was now gripping the railing of the witness box as if she were about to fall out of it. You didn't know you were being recorded, did you, Brenda? Silas asked, dropping the formal officer title. Objection, O'Shea stammered, clearly panicked. We haven't reviewed this evidence. The prosecution was provided this file in discovery labeled Vehicle Diagnostic Audio, Your Honor, Silas shot back. If Mr. O'Shea failed to review it, that is his oversight, not a violation of procedure. Judge Pendleton looked at O'Shea with undisguised annoyance. Is this true, counselor? O'Shea flipped frantically through his files, his hands shaking. I have a file by that name, Your Honor, but... Then the exhibit is admitted, Pendleton ruled, leaning forward, suddenly highly invested in the drama unfolding. Play the audio, Mr. Sterling. Silas plugged the USB into the courtroom's media system. He didn't look at the screen. He looked dead at Officer Brenda Higgins. Let's hear exactly what a routine traffic stop sounds like when the cameras are supposedly turned off. Silas pressed play. The courtroom speakers crackled to life. The sound of heavy rain drumming against a metal roof filled the silent room, a stark contrast to the sterile, dry air of courtroom 3B. For a moment, it was just the storm. Then, the crisp, unmistakable hum of a high-end vehicle's climate control system underneath the rain. Dispatch, this is SOS Channel 4. Active listening protocol initiated. GPS coordinates locked at Miller Avenue and 4th Street. A robotic, automated voice stated flatly. Silas stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on Officer Higgins. She looked like she had stopped breathing. Assistant District Attorney O'Shea sat frozen at his table, a man watching an avalanche barrel toward him with no cover in sight. Then, the voices began. License, registration, insurance, now. Higgins' voice blasted through the speakers. It wasn't the measured, professional tone she had used on the witness stand just minutes prior. It was jagged, aggressive, dripping with unwarranted hostility. Good evening, officer, Devin Carmichael's recorded voice replied. The audio fidelity was astonishingly clear, picking up the calm, even cadence of his words. Can you tell me the reason for this stop? I don't have to tell you a damn thing until you hand over your papers. Roll the window all the way down. Now. Officer, the rain is coming in, and my window is down enough for us to communicate and for me to pass my documents. I am reaching into my breast pocket for my wallet. My hands are visible. I said, roll it down. Stop moving. Stop moving your hands. On the witness stand, Higgins closed her eyes. The jury, a diverse cross-section of the city, leaned forward as one. 2 jurors in the front row were glaring openly at the officer. Officer, please de-escalate. Devon's voice remained impossibly steady, the tone of a man trying to talk someone off a ledge. I am complying. My hands are on the steering wheel. I am pressing the SOS button on my console to record this interaction for both our safety. Don't you touch that console! Tolliver, he's reaching for something. Officer, my hands are... Crack. The sound of the baton shattering the reinforced glass was deafening, a violent explosion of noise that made several people in the gallery physically flinch. The audio captured the heavy thud of the door being wrenched open, the grunts of physical exertion, and the sickening sound of Devon being hauled violently across the center console. But the audio didn't stop there. The struggle faded into the background, replaced by the sound of the rain and heavy breathing. Then, the distinct crunch of boots on wet asphalt approached the interior microphone. 2 voices, muffled but entirely intelligible, spoke near the shattered window. Jesus, Brenda, what the hell was that? Officer Tolliver's voice was laced with panic. You didn't even wait. He wasn't doing anything. Shut up, Paul, Higgins hissed, her voice trembling with adrenaline and malice. Did you see the suit? Did you see the car? He's probably a high-level distributor out of the East Ward. They all dress like that now. Just write it up as resisting. Say he made a furtive lunge. My body cam is dead, remember. Yours too. It's our word against his, and who are they going to believe? A cop? Or a suspect from Miller Avenue? Get the zip ties. Silas Sterling reached over and tapped the spacebar on his laptop. The audio abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the sound of a career ending. It was the sound of a carefully constructed lie disintegrating into dust. Judge Arthur Pendleton slowly took off his reading glasses. He looked down at the prosecution table, his face a mask of furious, unadulterated disgust. Mr. O'Shea, the judge's voice was dangerously quiet. Would you like to explain to this court how an audio recording of a police officer explicitly conspiring to falsify an arrest report ended up in my courtroom without your prior knowledge? O'Shea stood up, his knees visibly trembling. Your Honor, I swear to this court, I received a massive data dump from the defense during discovery. The file was labeled Diagnostic Data. I assumed it was mechanical telemetry regarding the vehicle's speed. You assumed, Pendleton repeated, the words dripping with venom. You put a sworn police officer on my witness stand to give perjured testimony, and your defense is that you didn't check your emails properly? Your Honor, I am sickened by what I just heard, O'Shea stammered, desperately trying to salvage his own law license. He pointed a shaking finger at Higgins. The state had no knowledge of this fabrication. If we had, we would have never brought these charges. Silas walked back to the podium. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He looked at Higgins with the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor. Officer Higgins, Silas said, his voice ringing through the quiet room. Is it still your sworn testimony that my client lunged for a weapon? Higgins stared straight ahead, her face completely drained of blood, resembling a wax mannequin. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked toward the gallery, where a row of fellow officers from the 14th Precinct had been sitting to show support. They were already standing up, quietly filtering out of the courtroom. They were abandoning her. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, Higgins whispered, the words tumbling out of her mouth like dry ash. Silas nodded slowly. A bit late for that, officer, but noted. No further questions for this witness, Your Honor. Judge Pendleton banged his gavel. The witness will step down. Do not leave the courthouse, Officer Higgins. Bailiffs, ensure she remains in the holding area outside these doors. I will be contacting the Internal Affairs Bureau and the District Attorney's Office immediately. As Higgins stood on trembling legs and was escorted out by the bailiffs, Silas Sterling turned to the bench. Your Honor, The defense calls its next witness, Officer Paul Tolliver. The air in the courtroom had shifted from tense anticipation to morbid fascination. The jury was wide awake, practically vibrating with the scandalous weight of the proceedings. Timothy O'Shea remained slumped in his chair, staring blankly at his legal pad. He knew he was no longer prosecuting Devin Carmichael. He was witnessing a highly orchestrated execution of corrupt authority. Officer Paul Tolliver walked through the double doors. Unlike Higgins, who had strutted in with unearned arrogance, Tolliver looked like a man walking to the gallows. He was younger, perhaps in his late 20s, his uniform slightly rumpled. He avoided making eye contact with anyone, especially the defense table where Devin Carmichael sat, still perfectly composed. Tolliver took the stand and swore the oath, his voice barely a whisper. "Officer Tolliver," Silas began gently, almost sympathetically, "you are currently represented by independent counsel, not the police union attorneys. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Tolliver swallowed hard. "Attorney Richard Kowalski. And under the advice of Mr. Kowalski, you have reached a proffer agreement with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Civil Rights Division, specifically Special Agent in Charge, Harrison Miller. Is that also correct?" O'Shea's head snapped up. "The FBI?" "Yes, sir," Tolliver said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Officer Tolliver, let's cut right to the heart of the matter," Silas said, stepping out from behind the podium. "You heard the audio playback outside in the hallway. You know the truth is out. Why did you and Officer Higgins pull over Devin Carmichael on the night of October 14th? Tolliver gripped the edges of the witness stand. He looked at the judge, then at the jury, and finally, directly at Devin. "We didn't have a valid reason. It was a pretext stop." "A pretext stop," Silas echoed. "Meaning you made up a reason to pull him over because you wanted to investigate him for something else. What was that something else?" Officer Higgins saw a black man driving a $100,000 car in a high-crime neighborhood," Tolliver admitted, the shame radiating from him. "She ran the plates, and when they came back to an out-of-state corporate lease, she assumed he was a drug trafficker. She said we were going to shake him down and see what fell out." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Pretextual stops based on racial profiling were notoriously difficult to prove in court. Hearing a sworn officer admit to it on the record was akin to catching lightning in a bottle. So the tinted windows, the swerving in the rain that was all fabricated? "Yes, sir. The car was driving perfectly fine." "And when you approached the vehicle, did Devin Carmichael resist arrest?" "No." Tolliver shook his head violently. "No, he didn't. He was calm. Too calm, honestly. That's what made Brenda Officer Higgins so angry. He wasn't intimidated by her. He knew his rights, and he wasn't feeding her ego. When he told her he was pressing the SOS button, she lost her temper. She broke the window because she was enraged, not because she was afraid. And the injuries Officer Higgins sustained? The bruised jaw she claimed my client gave her?" Tolliver squeezed his eyes shut. "When I was pulling Mr. Carmichael out of the broken window, Higgins tripped backward over the curb and hit her chin on the doorframe. Mr. Carmichael never threw a strike. He never even raised his hands defensively." "Yet you co-signed her official report," Silas pressed, his voice tightening. "You stood by while an innocent man was charged with multiple felonies, carrying a potential 20-year prison sentence. Why? Because of the blue wall," Tolliver blurted out, tears welling in his eyes. "Because she was a senior officer. She told me if I ratted her out, my career was over. I'd be labeled a rat. I'd never get back up on a hot call, and they'd find a way to fire me. I was scared. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry." "Sorry doesn't give a man back his freedom, Officer Tolliver," Silas said coldly. He walked back to his table and picked up a thick bound folder. "Fortunately, my client didn't need your apology. He needed your confession. Your Honor, I have one final line of questioning." Judge Pendleton nodded slowly. "Proceed, Mr. Sterling." Silas turned to the jury. "Officer Tolliver, when did you first realize exactly who you had pulled over?" 3 days ago, Tolliver whispered, when 2 FBI agents showed up at my house with a federal subpoena. "And what did they tell you?" They told me that Devin Carmichael wasn't just a DOJ auditor, Tolliver said, his voice shaking. They told me that for the last 6 months, the Department of Justice had been running a covert sting operation on the 14th Precinct due to statistical anomalies showing a 400% increase in excessive force complaints against minorities. The courtroom erupted. Reporters practically sprinted out of the double doors to make phone calls. Judge Pendleton slammed his gavel repeatedly, shouting for order, but the sheer magnitude of the revelation had shattered any semblance of courtroom decorum. Devin Carmichael finally moved. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, leaned back in his chair, and looked at Timothy O'Shea. It wasn't a look of anger. It was the look of a man who had just checkmated his opponent in 5 moves.
"Quiet in this courtroom,"
Pendleton roared, his face flushed red. As the noise slowly died down to a low, buzzing murmur, the judge looked at Tolliver, absolutely stunned. "Are you telling this court that the defendant was actively investigating your precinct at the time of the arrest?" "Yes, Your Honor," Tolliver said, hanging his head. "Mr. Carmichael purposefully drove that route in that specific car, knowing Higgins and I were on patrol. He was bait. And we swallowed the hook whole." Silas Sterling closed his binder with a definitive snap. "No further questions for this witness, Your Honor. And at this time, the defense moves for an immediate dismissal of all charges against Devin Carmichael, with prejudice." Timothy O'Shea didn't even stand up to object. He just buried his face in his hands. Judge Pendleton looked down at the prosecutor. "Mr. O'Shea, do you have any opposition to this motion?" O'Shea slowly stood, looking utterly defeated. His career, built on maintaining the status quo of the precinct, was entirely over. "No, Your Honor, the state. The state joins the defense in the motion to dismiss. Furthermore, my office will be initiating an immediate review of every single arrest ever made by Officer Brenda Higgins." "See that you do," Pendleton snapped. He banged his gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Case dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Carmichael, you are free to go. And, sir, thank you for your service to this city." Devin Carmichael stood up, buttoning his jacket. He offered a curt, respectful nod to the judge, shook Silas Sterling's hand, and turned toward the exit. He walked out of the courtroom with the exact same terrifying calmness he had walked in with. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He had a report to write, and the 14th Precinct was about to be dismantled, brick by corrupt brick. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B closed behind Devin Carmichael, but the storm he left in his wake was only just making landfall. Inside the small cinder block holding room adjacent to the courtroom, Brenda Higgins paced like a caged animal. Her fingernails bit into the palms of her hands. She was furious, embarrassed, but most of all, she was clinging to a desperate, fraying thread of denial. She was a cop. The union would protect her. They always protected their own. She'd get a quiet suspension, maybe a forced transfer to a desk job in a sleepy suburban district, and a few months of paid administrative leave. It was a humiliating setback, yes, but it wasn't the end. It couldn't be the end. The heavy metal door clicked and swung inward. Higgins stopped pacing, straightening her posture, ready to demand her union representative. It wasn't a union lawyer who walked through the door. It was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a sharp navy suit, holding a leather folder. Beside him stood a woman in a tactical windbreaker with the letters FBI emblazoned across the back in bold yellow. "Officer Brenda Higgins," the man said, his voice entirely devoid of the deference she was accustomed to. "I am Special Agent Harrison Miller, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Civil Rights Division." Higgins felt the blood drain from her face for the second time that day. Her throat suddenly felt like it was lined with sandpaper. I want my union rep. I'm not saying a word." "You don't need to say a word, Brenda," Miller replied, opening the folder. "In fact, I'd highly advise against it. We already have the audio. We have Officer Tolliver's sworn confession. And we have the dash cam footage from the cruiser behind you that you thought was turned off." Miller paused, letting the absolute finality of his words sink in. "Brenda Higgins, You are under arrest for the deprivation of civil rights under color of law, conspiracy to falsify official records, and aggravated assault. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking as the reality of the situation finally breached her arrogance. "I'm a decorated officer. I have 12 years on the force." "And you'll have plenty of time to reflect on them," the female agent said coldly, stepping forward and forcibly turning Higgins around. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs bit into Higgins' wrists. The click, click, click of the ratchets echoing in the small room was a sound Higgins had heard 1,000 times, but never, not once, had she imagined it applying to her. As they walked her out of the courthouse through the back loading dock, Higgins was forced to do the one thing she had subjected countless others to, the perp walk. Only this time, it was local news cameras waiting for her. Tipped off by the absolute chaos that had erupted upstairs, camera flashes blinded her. Reporters shouted questions she couldn't answer. She kept her head down, her meticulously polished badge now sitting in an evidence bag, stripped of all its unearned power. Over the next 6 months, the 14th Precinct was gutted like a fish. Devin Carmichael and his DOJ task force moved into the precinct headquarters like an occupying army. They seized servers, ripped through decades of paper files, and subpoenaed the personal cell phones of dozens of officers. The walls of the blue code of silence didn't just crack, they completely collapsed. Officer Tolliver, desperate to avoid federal prison, became the DOJ's star cooperator. He wore a wire into the precinct locker room, capturing 3 senior sergeants discussing how to retroactively alter arrest logs to cover for Higgins. The audit revealed a staggering, horrifying pattern. Higgins hadn't just made a mistake with Devin Carmichael, he was simply the first one with the power to fight back. Carmichael's team uncovered over 40 cases where Higgins had falsified reports, planted evidence, or used excessive force during pretextual traffic stops. One case in particular broke the city's heart and sealed Higgins' fate. 2 years prior, a 19-year-old local college student named Thomas Wright had been pulled over by Higgins on his way home from a late-shift library job. Higgins claimed Thomas had lunged at her, resulting in a physical altercation and a felony resisting arrest charge. Thomas lost his full-ride academic scholarship, spent 6 months in county jail, unable to afford bail, and fell into a deep depression. When Devin Carmichael's team cross-referenced Thomas Wright's case with the precinct's newly recovered GPS data, they proved Thomas's car had never even been moving when Higgins claimed he was swerving. End quote. She had targeted him simply because he drove an older car in a wealthy neighborhood. When the news of Thomas Wright's exoneration hit the press, the city exploded. The mayor demanded a total overhaul of the police department. The chief of police was forced into early retirement. Assistant District Attorney Timothy O'Shea, the man who had blindly enabled her, was investigated by the State Bar Association, quietly stripped of his law license, and forced into a humiliating public resignation. Karma, it turned out, was thorough. 1 year later, the scene shifted to the imposing, marble-clad walls of the United States District Court. The air here was different from the municipal courthouse, colder, sharper, and utterly unforgiving. Sitting at the defense table was Brenda Higgins. The crisp, authoritative Class A uniform was gone, replaced by a drab, oversized olive-green jumpsuit issued by the Federal Detention Center. Her hair, once pulled into a severe bun, hung limply around her shoulders. She looked aged, hollowed out by months of solitary confinement, a necessity to keep a former cop alive in a federal holding facility. In the gallery sat Thomas Wright, wearing a sharp suit bought for him by his new civil attorney, who was preparing a massive lawsuit against the city. And sitting 2 rows behind him, entirely unbothered and impeccably dressed as always, was Devin Carmichael. Federal Judge Eleanor Harper, a woman known for her merciless sentencing of corrupt officials, looked down from the bench. She didn't look at her notes. Her eyes were locked onto Higgins like a hawk on a field mouse. "Brenda Higgins," Judge Harper's voice boomed through the cavernous room. "You were given a badge, a gun, and the sacred trust of the public. You were sworn to protect the vulnerable. Instead, you weaponized your authority to terrorize them. You treated the citizens of this city not as people to be served, but as prey to be hunted to satisfy your own ego and prejudice. Higgins stared at the table, a single tear cutting a track down her pale cheek. There was no defiance left. The predator had finally realized she was at the bottom of the food chain. "You ruined lives with the stroke of a pen and a lie on a sworn affidavit," Judge Harper continued, her voice rising in volume. "But you made a fatal error. You assumed the darkness would always cover your tracks, and you assumed the people you hurt would never have the power to stop you. Today, the scales of justice balance." The judge picked up a stack of papers. "On the counts of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, conspiracy, and witness tampering, I sentence you to 180 months, 15 years, in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. You will serve this time without the possibility of early parole. And let this sentence serve as a stark warning to any officer who believes a badge is a shield for corruption." The strike of the gavel was deafening. It sounded like a cell door slamming shut. U.S. Marshall stepped forward, hauling Higgins to her feet. As they turned her to face the center aisle, her eyes met Devin Carmichael's. He didn't smile. He didn't sneer. He simply gave her a slow, deliberate nod, an acknowledgement of a job finished. Higgins looked away, tears openly streaming down her face, as she was marched out of the courtroom and into the dark, terrifying reality of a 15-year sentence among the very people she used to throw in cages. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining brightly, cutting through the lingering chill of the morning. Devin Carmichael walked down the wide marble steps, adjusting his tie. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Silas Sterling. Did she get what was coming to her? Silas asked. Devin looked up at the sky, a faint, satisfied smile finally touching his lips. She did, Silas. Every single second of it. He hung up the phone, walked to his Mercedes, and drove away. There were still other precincts, other files, and other corrupt cops hiding in the dark. But today, the streets were just a little bit brighter. When those sworn to protect become the predators, justice doesn't always wear a uniform sometimes. It drives a Mercedes and carries a federal badge. What did you think of Officer Higgins' brutal dose of karma? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more real-life twists.